say, for instance, ranking, I don't think he should be the advocate for photography. I think someone like Peter should do it. Certainly printed media felt a medium in terminal decline. That's how you end up with a unique visual fingerprint. Peter's work has exactly the same. I've got pictures of Peter's on my walls, and you can tell they're Peter Dench pictures. He has a compulsion to frame things in that way.
Harry, thank you for joining us. So let's start off by chatting a little bit about your sort of intro and your journey, and how did you sort of first realize that photography was what you wanted to do with your life?
Basically, my career has evolved into, this is sort of like a keynote speech that I've had, and it struck a chord with me. Oliver James, a psychologist, and he did this book called Affluenza, and he came to the conclusion that in order to live a kind of enjoyable and fulfilling life, you should attempt to do things for the intrinsic pleasure. And I realized sort of early on that kind of was embodied my approach to life generally. And I've just over time sort of leaned more and more into that. And so in answer to your question, I mean, I went to Plymouth College of Art and Design at the end of the 80s, really because I had two friends I went to school with, and I found out they were going, and I just thought it would be a really good laugh. And in the first year, I didn't really get anything done, and I was just about to be kicked off the course for only attending a third of the time that I was meant to. And then something happened, and probably Pete was quite right in identifying a fellow competitor. Pete's an extremely competitive person. I do think it's a sort of a core value that that does help drive you forward in a quite a demanding and challenging sort of world of photography. And I met a guy who I've not seen since really, but who was more into photography, was into the medium, and we had this sort of friendship stroke competitive relationship. I suddenly sort of started hanging with a different group of people. I mean, my friend who I went down to Plymouth with, you know, became a builder and then a car valeter. And then the other friend lives in Bridgewater, and they lead lovely lives and everything, but they're not photographers. And I sort of became kind of influenced by the company I was keeping. And quite often that's how life is. You meet someone, and then it's sort of, you kind of think, oh, they've turned me on to something that hitherto I'd been kind of quite unthoughtful about. And I just really fell in love with the medium. And the people that I liked, my friends, they're still, well, one of them is still a photographer now. They were into Richard Avedon, Irving Penn. They were into portraits, Diane Arbus. And even though we were doing a really lowly course, it was an OND, and my dad's expression was that and 75p will get you a cup of coffee. You know, it was probably the equivalent of an A level. Because we were sort of so enthused, we just used all the equipment and we were kind of up and running. And so when the OND finished, they immediately went to London. I got a job in a studio in Exeter, which lasted a few months. My dad was an art director in advertising, and he was friends with a really great photographer who sadly is pretty much forgotten because he was working in an analog era called Leicester Bookbinder. And he directed commercials for Chanel. He was part of an agency which was Ridley Scott's production company. So very, very high end. He used to make Vogue covers in the 1950s. And he came round to the place where we lived in Devon, and he was astonished that my dad hadn't told him that I wanted to be a photographer. And I showed him some work, and he said, "You have to be in London." And you did then. At the end of the 80s, you had to have an 01 number, a prefix, your telephone number. And that's really how it started. I went up to London. I had friends who were heavily specialized, and they were interested in portraits. And that's I was up and running, you know. And as I say, those sort of chance encounters kind of have a huge impact on your life.
Oh, no, that's great.
That's
And
quite a monologue.
no, it was great. And I think I'm interested to know as well was there that one big break? Was there that one shoot where you were like, I'm really good at this. I'm going to make this, like, give this a really good go? And I know you've mentioned online about shooting Blur at the sort of where you played snooker. Was that sort of the first shoot, or was there one even before that where you thought,
Well, I was telling Fred about scanning these pictures the other day. I mean, there are lots of little things that end up being false starts. So there was a magazine called Soho News, and I went. It was really large. It was A3, and they had the great reproduction. And I sort of looked at the masthead, and I found out it was kind of quite an esoteric magazine. It wasn't something that was. It was very regional, quite provincial, sort of Soho in London. So I found out where it was based in Clerkenwell, and I phoned up the picture editor and I said, "Can I come and see you?" And I was all excited. I'd just up in London, I'd had these sort of laminated prints made and everything up with my portfolio. And I went to the office and it seemed a bit kind of chaotic. And I said, "Where's Paul, the art director?" And they said he's down the pub, and which wasn't a good sign. But it was a big red flag. So I thought I was so angry. I sort of went into the pub and I found him and had a conversation and showed him my pictures in amongst the beer stains and sawdust. And we basically he decided that he was probably drunk, that he was going to give me 2 commissions. And so I hired Hasselblad. I hired all this lighting, and I got 2 really strong pictures. One guy was a DJ and the other was a singer, and I took live pictures, and I did an extraordinary amount of work on this, and then it never got published, and I never got paid. And I've still got the pictures laminated. So I printed them up and I got them laminated, and I took them to the NME. And the story is that basically, as I said to Fred, even something that appears like a abject failure, you will learn from it. You will I had something that I could put in my portfolio that looked kind of like it could get published. And in answer to your question, I mean, there are lots of little things that happen that kind of can help elevate you. So the National Portrait Gallery, the portrait competition, I would always enter that. And I've been very lucky to get pictures in over the years. And one year in '97, I got 3 pictures in, and one of them won a prize. And it just gives you that bit of exposure. So, for instance, one of the pictures was Michael Hutchence of In Excess, who I spent a week with in Paris. And he was this sort of washed up rock star. I was thinking, why am I doing this? Because my daughter was just born. And then subsequently, I was actually happened to be in Australia when I heard that he died. And then the picture sort of takes on a life of its own. And when people die young, like Amy Winehouse, they never get the opportunity. Their narrative story is never muddied by failure or getting old, and so they become kind of mythic. And so that picture, has been kind of a picture that is, incidentally, the picture that's really famous never actually got published at the time, and it was only subsequently that it was in the equivalent of the Taylor Wessing, and then took on a life of its own. So there are lots of little kind of moments like that.
yeah,
But you could identify them only with the benefit of hindsight, because at the time, that first shoot I did, I was furious.
yeah.
It was a complete waste of money, and money I couldn't afford.
I guess in that story with Keir, you've sort of really lent on your personal work and your personal projects, and
Absolutely. Yeah.
that there is that human aspect to it, and you're not just like a pap who's you're there doing a job. That there
Yeah.
is a human behind the camera, and I guess that's then a nice segue into your personal work. And
It's very
I'm
good.
gonna read. There you go. I've learned from Carl. So I'm gonna read it from here. So just because I don't want to get it wrong, but in one of your latest YouTube videos, you said that the celebrity work doesn't mean all too much to you. Personal work gives you that lasting sense of satisfaction. So with previous projects, like you mentioned, such as Single Dad and Survivor, you're now exhibiting The Darkest Hour, which is on display here. What can you tell us about The Darkest Hour, and I mean, and just sort of the story behind that personal project?
Yeah, I mean, it's not really been exhibited or seen anywhere, because it's actually quite a challenging subject to kind of get out. But it's something that people need to talk about. I mean, when I was young, none of my friends, I didn't hear of anyone that took their life, and now it's all too common. My children have friends or friends of friends who've taken their lives. And I had a guy that lived, he moved in next door to me, bought this property at the end of the canal where I live, which looked like a haunted house. And he completely renovated it. And he was kind of manic and brilliant, but also troubled. And he renovated his house. And in the course of interviewing him about his two marriages for my third book, on divorce, which was published by the School of Life, he told me that he suffered, he'd had suicidal thoughts and he lived with them and so on. And I'd wanted to do something about this, because so often the subject is always from the perspective of people left behind who are completely perplexed and understandably hurt, and but you never hear from people who actually live with it because it's so mired in taboo. It's just not talked about, and it's very, very common. I mean, the more that I've been doing it, the more I've been finding people, and it's important that I find people also who are mentally sort of robust enough and have some distance between having attempted suicide or had a comfortable and living with it. But yeah, I mean, it's a very personal project, which became even more personal when the guy that I met, my neighbor, I learned that he'd moved 25 times in 25 years, and he had bipolar, and he didn't like taking his medication, and he sort of always seemed to have a different girlfriend, and as quickly as he came into my life, he moved on. And then one sort of dark evening, I learned that he'd taken his life. He'd hung himself in the woods where he intended to move to his next house and everything. And so the project is kind of like dedicated to him. But really, I got to the point where I think if you photograph celebrities, you can either kind of consciously try to do that because you're enamored with Hollywood and Channel 4 and what have you, or it can be a consequence of being good at photographing people. And so I would sort of definitely put myself into that category of being good at photographing people. So unless you actively fight against it, it's inevitable you will end up photographing celebrities, because it makes a lot of sense, because your pictures are used more and people will make assumptions about you as a photographer because your pictures are more widely seen. So hence Annie Leibovitz is probably the best known photographer in the world, because she piggybacks the celebrity of the subjects that she's capturing. And I just got to the point where I was sort of in my middle age, and you start to question things. And I felt it was incumbent upon me to use my skills to a more intelligent end. And so I do like celebrities. I'm a trivial person at times. We're all kind of multifaceted. So, if the Guardian, like as they did last month, asked me to photograph Lorraine Kelly, I'm going to do it because it's sort of interesting, and Fred and I can get some content for our YouTube channel. And the Guardian don't seem to mind. I think they understand this new media landscape, and you can have a platform, and you can, and you're articulate. It feels actually thrilling to be doing the YouTube channel in parallel with my photography, because photography for the last 10 years has certainly felt a medium in terminal decline, certainly printed media. And so it's quite exciting to be part of something that's potential to grow. So I basically, as a sort of salve, actually around the time that I read the book by Oliver James, Affluenza, I thought I'm going to do more personal projects. And so they're all things that I feel I have skin in the game. So Survivor, my dad was an atheist, and I grew up in Devon, so I never met anyone who had Jewish heritage. So it was kind of an exploration of a part of my identity, even though technically I wouldn't be considered Jewish by Jews because it's matrilineal. But Hitler would have considered me Jewish, so it's sort of it's interesting, that's perspective. And then I got divorced in 2009, and so and for me the most important thing that I didn't want to happen is that for it to impact on my children. And so that's how Single Dad sort of evolved. And then Alain de Botton at the School of Life saw Single Dad and commissioned me to do On Divorce, which is great, because then someone else is sort of bankrolling these things, and they're going to get published.
It's that sweet spot, isn't it, when you can
Absolutely.
get paid for the personal projects that you really want to spend your time doing. And
Yeah.
you mentioned there that there is a crossover between the celebrity worlds and the personal projects. What differences are there between those sort of bodies of work? Do you almost feel more pressure in your personal projects to, not that celebrities aren't real people, but there are a lot more human stories in the personal projects that you're representing and you're shooting. Do you feel more pressure to get that right rather than just having 5 minutes to go and shoot Keir Starmer, for example?
I think in terms of your career progression and the fiscal elements of your life, the financial elements, then it's kind of raw and mercenary photographing celebrities. There's a kind of pressure that you want to be successful as a photographer, and you get to photograph Keir Starmer, you want to do it well. But ultimately, the pressure that you would have, I mean, I've only ever done a couple of weddings for friends and stuff. I wouldn't do a wedding, not because I would look down on that, but that's something probably for some people the biggest day of their life, and that's proper pressure, because that's actually something that can never be repeated. And so I do, looking back now, I've got 25,000 rolls of film, and that's before I even went digital. And it's so fascinating looking back. And the pictures that are really precious to me are the pictures that I took for the love of it, especially of my children, and they're really interesting as well, and very revealing, because I think I was innately a photographer, and I was documenting my life as a photographer does, in a sort of coolly detached way. And so I do want to incorporate those pictures. So for instance, I have a project I'm doing with my daughter, Polly, who's not a photographer or an artist even, but she enjoys drawing. And so whenever we're together from 2019, she draws a picture of me and I do a portrait of her. And it's sort of about the passing of time. It's intergenerational. It's about our relationship. And I mean, those pictures are on another level from any picture of Keir Starmer, which I really don't ultimately care about, other than for money and prestige of being seen to photograph. I mean, the good thing about photographing Keir Starmer, I said to Fred, it's good for the channel, because when you go on YouTube, there's lots of people pretending to be photographers, and they're completely bogus. I mean, I wouldn't say this on my channel because it would be kind of quite.
Should turn the mics off. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to sort of like say it's a grift, but I mean, it's a very challenging thing to do, and a lot of people who are doing it on a day-to-day basis. For instance, I've worked for Channel 4. I photographed Jamie Oliver back in the day. When I was doing that, I would be reluctant maybe to talk about it, although Jamie wouldn't mind. And Jamie's sort of really been encouraging it on the channel, and that's something that's my ace in the pack, because when I was with Jamie, and my Instagram was just starting, and I sort of had a chat with him and just asked his advice, and he's given me several shout outs on his Instagram, which is 8 million subscribers, and suddenly it's so exciting. You're getting hundreds of thousands of followers, and really good followers too. So. But I think I've sort of lost my train of what was the original question?
I think I've lost my train as well, but I think it touches upon what Peter mentioned of diversify to survive.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's something that yourself and Fred, your son, have sort of recently bought into with your YouTube channel.
That's right, because Fred was a software engineer and very successful doing that. But it wasn't making him particularly happy, because money is just a sort of a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. And I'm not trivializing in these sort of difficult times, because when money is tight, but I do focus on keeping my burn really low, and it's about the work. And I'd rather kind of do stuff life is so finite and so short. It's really important to do something that you genuinely feel that was a good use of your time.
And for those in the audience that haven't come across your YouTube channel, can you give a sort of a bio and explainer of what the content is? What do you guys get up to
Well,
on that?
it's a sort of kind of a constantly evolving thing, and it's the sum of its parts. So I think it's greater than the sum of its parts, actually. So it has a young person's energy and dynamism. That's Fred. You know, I think if it was just me doing the YouTube channel, it would be kind of egotistical, and you know, me bigging myself up. And he sort of pricks my pomposity often, and is able to kind of you know, just bring it all down to earth and keep it real. And then it's also the product of, you know, I do have more pictures in the archive of the National Portrait Gallery than, you know, anyone else of my age. You know, Rankin has probably got like, I think probably one or two, and I've got over 100. There's the competitiveness. But I mean, it's a good barometer of whether you've got something definitive, whether you've whether somebody has independently, subjectively evaluated your pictures and decided that they are definitive of whoever it happens to be. And so, you know, I have this enormous since 1988. You know, the copyright is retained by the photographer unless he assigns it. So I had this enormous sort of archive. So it's a good use of me being able to talk about my work and pull back the curtain and explain that often it's luck and serendipity and sort of being alive to things that just can fall into your lap. And quite often it's not a slavish obsession with technique and fetishizing lighting. It's just being alive to the moment, and it's very you know, in modern sort of when people talk about mindfulness. I mean, there's nothing more mindful than when you're in the groove and you're taking pictures, because you're literally capturing moments in time, and you can't be sort of thinking about the past or the future. You're completely in that moment, and that's why I think it's sort of enthralling and something that you know, is worth celebrating, and that's what we do on the channel, really.
It's really interesting to obviously you mentioned like your first sort of experiences in the industry were laminating and printing prints to then go to a sort of a pub to a drunken art director, and now you've got like do you feel a lot more empowered with being able to sort of control your own sort of narrative with the YouTube channel? And how have you found that in terms of like being able to build your own brand
It's
and
been,
awareness like on the internet really compared to just the
yeah,
old school way of doing it?
absolutely. I mean, I think all bets are off. It used to be the case that I had this an aluminium portfolio case, and I would sort of cycle around London with it, balancing it on my handlebars, and then I'd sort of bring out you'd show one person. But the wonderful thing about YouTube is that if you do produce something that's compelling and sort of impacts on people and sort of has legs, then you can kind of really reach a consensus. I mean, Stuart Lee talks about it in his comedy. You know, whether you like him or not, you know, he has a small but very dedicated number of people who'll pay to go and see him. You know, so for instance, I used to have a reverence for sort of technical mastery. You know, I used to like Nick Knight, and I would just try and work out how he did this amazing lighting in the 80s when I was at college. And I was obsessed with technique and lighting and everything being perfect in the camera. My pictures and all my pictures online, they're cropped in the camera because I sort of have a very strong opinion about how I frame it when I actually take the picture. You know, it's something that I sort of tune into instinctively. And that's how and like Peter said, that's how you end up with a unique visual fingerprint. And then Peter's work has exactly the same. I've got pictures of Peter's on my walls, and you can tell they're Peter Dench pictures because he has a compulsion to frame things in that way. And that's all being a photographer is having strongly held opinions about how you see the world.
Like this, I guess,
Yeah.
compared to
Well, that's very not my type of picture, is it, Pete? I mean, it's a press picture, really.
Yeah.
But you know, I just like to. It's a bit like, you know, Peter and I played tennis, you know, or whatever. You try and take someone on at their own game, you know.
Yes.
And you know, I just think be prepared to fail, but commit fully to it, and don't and try and take pictures that only you can take, that are kind of that you feel very strongly about, you know, rather than kind of trying to take a picture that, you know, that people can kind of objectively think is sort of well composed and so on. Photographs are moments, and so it's easy to get kind of drawn into the currents of contemporary ideas about aesthetics and so on. But ultimately, the pictures that stand the test of time quite often aren't about technique. Quite often they're with daylight, and like the picture of Michael Hutchinson, they are genuine moments.
I'm keen to give the audience 10-15 minutes of Q&A time as well, but before we do, maybe we could just sort of wrap up of what's next for you. What projects are you working on? What can you tell us about what is
Well,
next?
the doing the Darkest Hour, and actually it was really difficult to get it out. I mean, I have sort of showed it to the Guardian, and no one wants to publish it because it's sort of incendiary. No one wants to talk about it. There are kind of protocols which are kind of nonsensical about talking about it, and apparently it's more likely that people will think of doing it and so on. So it's really kind of something that's a problem that I probably shouldn't be doing. It's a bit like the Single Dad book, which was really difficult to get published because it's people are more inclined to be talking about toxic masculinity rather than dads who maybe their wife died of cancer and they're basically they're struggling but they're bringing up their children on their own, and they're good guys, and I so that's probably something that I probably not wasn't inclined to. I thought I'll get it together for Pete, but it's maybe it's a bit of a cul-de-sac and not worth putting a lot of energy into it. But I think I think from the response that I talked about it on the video, I think it's something that I will kind of lean into.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess it's like you said, that is lots of sort of small interactions and conversations then sort of make the project what it becomes. So that, I guess that's really interesting.
One thing I would say, going off on a complete tangent, I saw the Joel Meyerowitz film, a documentary. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's about him and his wife, and it's the best documentary I've ever seen. And anyone who's into photography or is in a relationship should watch it. It's an extraordinary. It's called Two People Trying Not to Kill Each Other, and I saw that last week, and just from a photographic point of view, and also Joel Meyerowitz, who I don't know, is clearly an incredible person, and I think really being a photographer is less about lenses and camera equipment and lighting, and it's more about just being open. And he seems like a sort of monk, a kind of spiritual photographic monk, and I think that's why he's had such an amazing career and produced the body of work that he has.
So you might not know the answer to this, so good luck. But most sort of photographers in that online space, so they talk about, they do tech reviews or very, very straight BTS, here's me holding a camera. Why do you think a lot of photographers shy away from that kind of more anecdotal storytelling about their own practice and own work?
I think probably I am inclined to do that because of the dysfunction of my sort of upbringing. So, in therapy, my therapist and I came to the conclusion that my dad was a narcissist. And then the next step, I mean, my dad would probably not even mind me saying that because he was quite a character. But he basically, then the therapist made the logical observation that the perfect environment, if you're a photographer photographing celebrities, is being the child of a narcissistic parent, because you have to be really vigilant. But also a byproduct of that might be that it makes you inclined to be maybe someone who could do YouTube or be an actor. So I am sort of quite extrovert, I think, by nature, and I like attention, and I like sort of I mean, my Fred does not like attention. I said to him, I'm going to get him up, and he's like, don't you dare. But I most of the people around me, most people I know aren't like it. I think you have to be predisposed. And in fact, one of the reasons I started the channel was I was watching Pete become a really good writer. He came and interviewed me, came down to my house and did a really good piece, and has, like we were talking about, like a chameleon, you know, evolved. I think that's a skill in general about life. You know, like you get lemons, you make lemonade. That sounds really glib, but you basically get to you do get challenges in life, and they can be opportunities. And I do think learning and growing and actually sort of being open to the possibility that you might have got things wrong, and you can learn from that, is sort of a valuable thing. And that's something I try and espouse on the channel. But you know, really, I overshare. I don't really have boundaries. I'm kind of so I'm inclined to be like that. And looking back now at my contemporaries, you know, say for instance Rankin, I don't. Well, I'm going to say I don't think he's a natural. I don't think he's a great communicator. And leaving aside what you think of his work, I don't think he should be the advocate for photography. I think someone like Peter should do it, or Grant, or Grant Scott. I listen to his podcast. Do you not like Grant? I like Grant. But basically, you know, I think not everyone is kind of by nature loquacious and extrovert and pontificates and stuff. I mean, the people around me, they don't watch the videos because they get enough of this, and they've had their full.
Harry, can we take a question from Joe, who's kind of author of the Projecting Grief exhibition we've got on, just because I think
Yeah, no, of course.
Oh, thanks.
Hi, Joe.
Well, it's about the dark cell, obviously, and it's kind of double question of how you find your participants, and then how you find interviewing them, basically, and the kind of writing side of it as well.
Yeah, it was sort of came out of the previous project. So I've been doing more and more writing, and I find it quite a rewarding thing. So I wrote the foreword to the Survivor book, and then I wrote the much more authored and distinct piece for Single Dad, and that gave me a lot of confidence. And the Single Dad, I basically interviewed my subjects. In fact, I got them to ask me. I asked them what they love about fatherhood and how they became a single parent dad, and I transcribed what they wrote into my prose, which I wrote, and then I sent it to them and just checked that they were happy with it. And then that formed the kind of modus operandi that I used for the suicide project. But in answer to your question, it's been really difficult because I started, Pete will know about this, I had a guy that became a really good friend, and my introduction was actually talking about me inadvertently saving his life because he'd taken an overdose, and he had texted me at 12:30 at midnight, you know, and I just happened to look at my phone. I'm not normally late to bed. And I phoned the police, and they bashed down his door, and I picked him up from hospital the next day. And he was very, very vulnerable. And I got my first subjects through a friend I was at school with, who's a clinical psychologist, and I realized that they're much too vulnerable. And but through initially finding those people and talking about the project socially with friends and so on, I realized how common it was. And actually, it's much better to find people that are, you know, leading very functional lives and able to sort of confidently assert that they want to be involved, and they give their kind of consent. Because the other thing is, I don't like getting people to sign model release forms. So School of Life wanted me to get all my subjects to sign a model release form, and I just refused because I think it's deceitful, because I know how charming I can be when I'm photographing someone, and you're buzzing after the shoot, and they'll sign anything. They would sign their soul to me, you know. And so I want them to sort of be a collaborator for the term of the project. And if at any stage, like this guy who took his life, he basically sort of went, you know, he completely had a meltdown when I told him about. I thought he'd be really pleased because he was bullying me into doing something with this project. So I was really pleased that Pete agreed to exhibit it. And so he basically sort of caused a lot of grief. And so I think probably that would be my where I'm at with it, is to find people that are quietly not people who've been in have being treated sort of psychiatrically, which is what I started out with, because that's just fraught with difficulties. And also I've had problems with the NHS and the data protection, and all the while I'm spending hours doing this, and I'm doing it for nothing, for the love of it, and no one wants to publish it, and so it's kind of like you're on a bit of a hiding for nothing. But the last few getting it together for Pete has been quite a rewarding experience, and so that's where I'm at with it.
I've got like 10 more questions, but I'll come back.
Yeah, got time for one more?
So,
Or you,
Just a quick one.
Yeah.
You mentioned Stuart Lee. Have you photographed him?
I have photographed Stuart Lee. Yeah. What's that?
Is it on YouTube?
No. I photographed him with Richard Herring, but disappointingly, I have been to see Stuart Lee a few times. I'm probably one of the liberal elite type of people that he lambasts. But he had no recollection of having been. When I went and bought a book from him, he had no recollection. But I was probably that's the problem, is you can be, if you acquiesce and you're too much of a sort of fan. It's sort of it's kind of a corrosive dynamic to getting a good picture. So or having a relationship, because people want to relate to you on a normal level, and I was sort of a bit starstruck, I think. But yeah, back in the day, I was on film, so it was a while back. It was probably around early noughties.
cool. I think we'll wrap it there, but if anyone does have any other questions, do come and find Harry. But yeah, if we get a round of applause for Harry to spend any time with us today.
Thank you.